Journalists are the dupes in this story. They're the
Yeah.
patsies. They're not the ones planning the heist. They're not the ones pulling off the heist. They're sure as hell not the ones who are like making off with the loot. They're the
Mm,
patsies. They got handed these ridiculous stories like the Steele dossier, and they ran with them, and their role was important. Don't get me wrong. The use of the media as a bullhorn to promote these stories, to sort of pull tens of millions of Americans into this information operation, first as spectators and then later as sort of passive participants by turning it into this culture war theater, was important.
hmm.
But journalists didn't come up with any of this. They are not directing these narratives. They're useful as they're useful instrumentally, but they are not the key to understanding this story. And there's a risk in focusing too heavily on the journalists that you will miss the role of the intelligence agencies and the political operatives and the billionaires funding the nonprofits, who are really the key drivers of this, insofar as they are the ones who established the institutional basis for prosecuting this information war, for spreading these narratives, credentialing these narratives. And yeah, it's like there's plenty to criticize in
Yeah.
journalism, um, but yeah, it's not where the story starts nor where it ends.
Yeah, that's, I think what's so unsettling is the feeling that, as you mentioned in the piece, there are these algorithms now that just invisibly direct what gets elevated, I think maybe along the way, one of these puppet masters realized that censoring people, it's like the Streisand effect. It gives them more power and more, and it's actually better if you just kind of make them invisible, make things that you don't want invisible. So there just seems to be, I mean, I encounter it. It's hard not to get paranoid. I think it makes it makes one paranoid because I encounter it on YouTube where we always kind of joke, is this the algorithm or do we just suck? And it might be both. There could be a combination of both, but you can see something getting traction and then it's like an invisible foot just steps on it. And you can see it in the numbers. You can see it's going crazy, going gangbusters by any kind of anything that you would think you would know about virality and the way the internet works. That shouldn't be, then it just falls off a cliff invisibly and gets no views, from getting thousands. So when we see that stuff, we're like, what is that weird? And it might just be the AI and these kind of tripwires that you hit, and then you're
Yeah,
like, you don't exist.
and then you don't exist, and like
Yeah.
you could get caught in the paranoia loop in way some degree of paranoia, I would argue, is quite healthy and reasonable in the current environment, but it's not necessarily the most productive mental framework excuse me, for approaching this problem. Like, the problem is there is too much unaccountable black box power. That's the fundamental problem. So if you take apart the black box and you open it up and you reveal the decision making processes, then all of a sudden you've re-entered the realm of human politics. Like, YouTube made this decision for this reason. We object to it. We think that it sucks, but it's legal, whatever. But what produces the paranoia and then gets you caught in a cycle in which you are paralyzed because you are paranoid and yet completely incapable of affecting the thing that is making you paranoid, is the degree to which the most powerful institutions in our society, arguably the most powerful institutions that have ever existed, certainly the most powerful corporations, arguably, that have ever existed in the history of the world, make decisions in a manner that is not only inscrutable to humans, but is increasingly becoming structurally inaccessible to humans insofar as it's being outsourced to AI models that cannot be understood even by their
Right.
program. So, what does that mean? In a practical sense, in the only way out is through sense, part of what it means is we have to go past the algorithms, go past the AIs to the people controlling the algorithms who are ultimately the decision makers here and who have to be made in some way accountable for what these things do and the way in which they affect our lives. And that is true, I would argue, even absent the kind of state corporate collusion we now know exists, but becomes not simply true, but an urgent imperative to deal with now that we know that these algorithms are not just they're not simply reflective of the priorities inside the corporations. They reflect top down state level, from the White House in some cases, as we learned from the Twitter files and ongoing lawsuits like the one in Missouri, top down, state directed, White House directed political operations. And the paranoia is a reasonable response, but you can get lost inside of it.
What's the lawsuit in Missouri for people listening?
So that's the one that I'm going to butcher his name. It's a number of doctors. Aaron Cariardi, who just wrote a piece about this for Tablet, where I'm an editor, that I really recommend people check out. And Jay Bacciaria,
Oh,
I'm
yep.
sure I've screwed up his name, and I apologize to him. He's a smart guy, but effectively, it's a lawsuit about government censorship and the government tech corporation censorship, and the disclosures from it have been extraordinary, as brought by the Attorney General of Missouri, and it's about the constitutionality of what's happening. It's probably going to go to the Supreme Court. It's an extremely important case. The disclosures from it are extraordinary. So we have things like, in the disclosures, we have things like Jen Easterly, who's the current head of CISA, the cybersecurity agency inside the State Department that really led the so-called election integrity efforts, where millions of posts online were flagged and in some way censored or suppressed, ostensibly on behalf of election integrity, but really in ways that are very directly tied into political agendas. And we have Jen Easterly, the head of CISA. You see in the disclosure, like at one point, she's quoted as saying that it's dangerous when people have access to their own facts, that CISA's because we live in a post-truth world and people can't be trusted to make these judgments about which facts are real facts, and so we need the government information regulators to protect them. And so this comes back in a very direct way to the hybrid war theory stuff, right? Because this is the domestic use of military concepts and military technologies to protect us from threats. Easterly, the head of CISA, right, whose job was supposed to be about protecting infrastructure, right? It's an infrastructure agency, now declares that includes, and I'm quoting, cognitive infrastructure, meaning
That is insane.
people's thoughts, the spaces
Yeah,
online in which they form and share
this
and
is nuts.
disseminate those thoughts,